What's up, you guys? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Danielle Hallen and I'm back with another true crime video. But before I get into it, I want to let you guys know, if you missed my previous video, that I will be at CRIMECON Nashville this year. It's from May 31st to June 2nd and I'm so freaking excited, you guys. And if you would like to go, you can use my code Hallen to get 10% off of a standard ticket. They usually do sell out, just to let you know, and they've already sold out of their gold VIP tickets and their platinum VIP tickets. So if that's something you would love to do, go ahead and hop on it and let me know. If I will see you down in the comments below. Now on to the case. Today we are speaking about an absolutely wild case. It's probably one of the most shocking stories I've ever heard in my entire life, and also one of the most inspiring. This case set a precedent in the United States court system, and it hits such a deep place in my heart for a plethora of reasons. And the moment that I saw the documentary, The Fire That Took Her, that is about this case, I knew that I absolutely had to share it with you guys, because this woman is hands down a hero. After being set on fire and fighting for 2 years in the hospital, Judy Malinowski became the first person to testify at her own murder trial in the history of the United States. And not only that, but she helped to put together Judy's Law to help get justice for victims like herself in the future. And it is not every day that you get to see murder victims actively able to participate in anything like that, for obvious reasons. And since I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, let's go ahead and get into all of the details. Judy was raised in Ohio as the first of 3 siblings. Her mother had always so badly wanted kids, so Judy, being her first, had a really special place in her heart. Her mom, Bonnie, doted on how easy and sweet she was as a child, something that just seemed to blossom as she grew older. She was described by all of her loved ones as being the best big sister. She took that role very seriously, and she was always a friend to everyone. Every single video that I've seen of Judy, she just has this huge smile plastered on her face, or her head thrown back in a laugh. She was always active at school growing up. She was a cheerleader, she did beauty pageants, and she was also voted homecoming queen. She was incredibly popular and well-loved, and she knew exactly what she wanted out of life. And Judy's dream was to live simply. She had always told her mom that she never ever needed anything extravagant and wild. She just wanted love, she wanted 2 kids, and a quiet place to call home. Judy went on to be a single mom to 2 beautiful daughters that she loved more than anything. And while her life was shaping up to be just as she had hoped, life also decided to throw her for a loop. Judy was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at a very young age, and this was a horrifying experience, especially knowing that she had 2 daughters that relied on her. But everyone that knew Judy knew she was a fighter. She was going to get through this, and she did beat the cancer. But shortly after, it returned with a vengeance, which led her to the only option that she had left, a hysterectomy. Now, one of the things that is just not spoken about enough with cancer treatment is the addiction that often comes hand in hand with it. And because of the level of pain that Judy was experiencing, she was put on opiates. Judy ended up spiraling headfirst into an addiction. It's just absolutely wild to me that the thing that can help you beat one lethal battle can throw you into the trap of another that is equally as lethal. But she wanted to trust her doctors, her family wanted to trust her doctors. You're supposed to be able to feel like what you're doing is right, and when you're in that much pain, you really rely on these medications. And so it is such an awful, awful feeling to become addicted to something like opiates when you're in the middle of trying to heal your body. Now, because of the addiction, Judy's kids went to stay with her mom, while Judy was fighting to get clean. And eventually her insurance ran out, and it left her with no access to the medication that she had become so dependent on. So unfortunately, she ended up turning to the one thing she could still get her hands on, which was heroin. Eventually, Judy had enough with what was going on, and she checked into a rehab. This is not what she wanted out of her life. She wanted to be the mom that she'd always hoped to be, and she was fighting hard for it, you guys, and she was doing it. She ended up beating her addiction. She was getting her life back on track. The cancer was under control. The drug use was under control. All of these things that had felt so out of her control for so long, and she had even met a man named Michael Slager in April of 2015, right in the midst of getting clean. And this was another piece to the puzzle that she had always hoped for. From the way it was described, it seems that they were already acquaintances of some sort. Michael had popped into Judy's Facebook messages one day and basically just started to confess his love for her. After everything that she had gone through, this felt like a light at the end of the tunnel. She had beat cancer not once, but twice. She fought addiction that she landed in from fighting the cancer, and now she has this man telling her all of the things that she wanted to hear. It felt like after riding a roller coaster, her life was starting to fall into place. But her mom just felt like something was off with this guy. In her words, he just looked like trouble. Now, Judy tried to reassure her mom that this man was great, Michael was awesome, and you can't judge a book by its cover. And she continued to see him with hope for their future. And Michael himself even showed up at Judy's mom's house to try and convince her that he was a good guy. When he got there, he spoke to her about religion and that he had tattoos and was rough around the edges, but inside he was a good person. And religion was very, very important to Judy's family. And so he really played on that and said, God would not want you to judge me for my appearance on the outside. So ultimately, Judy's mom kind of checked herself and said, you know what, you're right. I need to bring myself down to earth, and decided to give him a chance. But unfortunately, her initial gut feeling about Michael had been right. All of that progress that Judy had made came to a screeching halt shortly after meeting Michael. Judy was using again. Now, from the outside, Michael seemed to be worried about her and doing everything he could to help. He would reach out to her mom, concerned about her drug use, saying that she wouldn't come home some nights, and he even frantically called Judy's mom at one point, saying that she wasn't breathing and they needed to call 911 as if she had OD'd. And it was really just painting this terrifying picture that Judy had lost control of her life again after fighting so hard to get past addiction, and she was hurting those around her. And it seemed that Michael, was worried, but at the same time, it almost felt like he wanted everyone to be angry at Judy. It was like he was encouraging everyone to drag her through the mud. He would call her mom to essentially complain about her and say, how dare Judy do all these things that she is doing. Michael had even started to ask Judy's mom for money to help pay for these bills that he said they were so far behind on due to Judy's drug use. So really you can see how her mom is thinking, this guy's trying to help. He wants to get her bills paid. He wants to take care of her. He wants to get her out of this. But the reality of this was very, very different. According to Judy herself, from the moment they went on their first date, she and Michael were inseparable. And not in the cute, good way. He literally wouldn't leave. Michael essentially became a squatter in her apartment and was glued to her side at all times. And he knew the one thing that he could do to make sure that she would stick around. While Michael himself didn't use drugs, he started to bring home heroin at a time when Judy was fresh off of beating her addiction, incredibly vulnerable to relapse. Just like that, Judy was again dependent on drugs. And more importantly, their source, Michael. Once Judy was hooked again, he had started to try and put a wedge in her relationship with her mom. And Judy's mom eventually realized that all of these calls and texts that he had been sending had never actually been out of concern for Judy, but instead it was a manipulation and control tactic to try and isolate Judy from those that cared for her. He wanted to see people angry. He wanted to get a reaction. This was all fun for him. And the money that Judy's mom had been sending him to help pay all of these bills that he said Judy wasn't paying, instead he had been using it to buy Judy more heroin. He was enabling addiction to ensure his total control over Judy. Their relationship was toxic and aggressive, and Michael wouldn't let Judy be alone for even a moment. And when she finally realized how bad of a situation she was in, she tried to cut things off with Michael, and he refused to leave, to the point that Judy reached out to her family multiple times, begging someone to help her get Michael out of her apartment. But nothing anyone did seemed to be making a difference. There were even times when she would pack up and hide in a nearby hotel to get away from him while people would try to convince him to leave. Judy's mom at this point was begging him to stop buying her drugs, please just let her go, and he just repeatedly refused. And unfortunately, because of the way addiction works. In moments where things weren't absolutely terrible and Judy was desperate to feed her addiction, she would go back to Michael and the cycle would start all over again. It was a bad situation, and Michael was doing everything that he could to shift the blame and maintain his control. In just those few short months that they were together, which was literally April 2015 to August 2015, like the very beginning of August, over 13 calls were made to the police department. And most of those calls were frivolously made by Michael himself. He had started to use it as not only a scare tactic when Judy would try to leave him, but as a way to have a documented upper hand. Like, anyone who is familiar with abuse, manipulation, is probably over there just like curling inward on themselves at how calculated and planned what this man was doing was. And Michael would call police with all of these complaints, but he never actually wanted any legal steps taken. For example, he called and reported that his car had been stolen by her at one point. They got into an argument. She left with his car to get away from him. When he called to tell police his car was stolen, he ultimately didn't want to press any charges. So he was just trying to scare the crap out of her to come back to him, bring the car back so he could maintain control. He would also call and try to report Judy as missing if he didn't know where she was, which is just yet again another gross misuse of police that abusers try in order to get the location of their victims. Like, there is a book on things that these people will do to maintain control, and it looks like he was legitimately following it step for step. Finally, at the end of May 2015, which was just 2 months prior to her attack, Judy ended up reaching out to police because she desperately needed help. And she confided in them how scared she was of Michael. She explained to them that he was always watching her and that if he ever found out that she planned to leave him or that she was speaking to the police to try to get help, that he would kill her. She felt trapped in the relationship, not just because of the addiction, but because she was so scared that she would end up dead if she didn't stay. And in the documentary, The Fire That Took Her, the detective that took this call and spoke to her said that she was so obviously distressed and terrified in the phone call, but unfortunately, when she got to a point where she was so scared that he was watching her, she ended the phone call, and despite numerous attempts to reach back out to her, she didn't answer. And so ultimately, nothing was legally done to help Judy get out of this dangerous situation. So at this point, Judy did the only thing that she could think of. The only safe place for her was going to be a rehab. Not only because she wanted to get clean again, but it was a place that Michael could no longer have any control over her. So August 2nd, 2015, that is where Judy was headed. A rehab had called saying that they had an open bed for Judy, and she was beyond ready. She was ready to get rid of Michael. She was ready to get clean again. And Michael, of course, was the one who offered to drive her there. And in the documentary, Judy's mom said that looking back, she had this uneasiness about Michael taking her. She just felt that if Michael had anything to do with Judy going to rehab, Judy would never make it there. And that is exactly what ended up happening. That afternoon, a call came into 911 from a frantic bystander at a Speedway gas station in Gahanna, Ohio. This dispatcher was trying to get information from this caller and trying to get the caller to calm down, but you can only be so calm when you just witnessed a woman set on fire.
Okay, stop screaming because I can't understand you. I got you.
The reality of the situation was not at all realized until the police finally arrived on scene. They initially expected that maybe a small fire had been started. It wasn't anything huge, something accidental. But the reality was that Judy was on the ground. Her clothes had melted off of her, and she was barely clinging to life. She had been the woman that was set on fire. Right away, police went to speak to witnesses, including Michael Slager, and Michael told the police this was all a huge accident. He claimed that Judy had been pumping gas into the car, flashed a little bit on herself in the process, and I feel like we've all done that at one point or another and really just don't think too much of it. And so they didn't think twice about it when a few minutes later, she decided to sit down in the grass nearby to smoke a cigarette. Michael said that he leaned down to light it for her, and Judy burst burst into flames. He told police that after she ignited, he ran to get a fire extinguisher to put her out while someone else called 911. But the witnesses and the scene told a completely different story. Authorities knew from the get-go he is not telling the truth. Witnesses claimed that the two had actually been arguing pretty badly just prior to the fire, and that this was far from an accident. And considering the extremity of the burns, this wasn't from a small splash of gasoline either. So Detective Chad Cohagen sent officers to a nearby bank, hoping that maybe surveillance video there caught what actually happened. Meanwhile, both Judy and Michael were transported to the hospital. Now, Michael did have a few minor burns, but Judy, on the other hand, it was expected to be fatal. Judy had third and fourth degree burns over 80% of her body. I've seen everywhere from 70 to 90%. I'm not sure what is correct. Her ears were gone and she was unrecognizable. According to one of Judy's nurses that spoke in the documentary, they have an equation that they use to determine mortality for burn victims. You take their age, their percentage that they're burned, the degree of the burn, and it put Judy at 110%. She was only expected to live a couple of hours, days at most, and that was even pushing it. She was unable to talk. She had lost most of her vision and was in unimaginable pain. While doctors fought to save Judy's life and manage her pain, police obtained the surveillance footage from the bank, and it showed the entirety of what happened. By some crazy miracle, they were directly in front of this camera. Now, I am not showing the entirety of the footage. It is one of the hardest things I've ever had to watch, so proceed with caution if you go and find it anywhere out there. I'm just going to be showing the events leading up to it if I can find the full video to begin with. But the footage shows the couple pulling in to the gas station next door where they got out of the car, and it's obvious that they were in a heated argument. You can see Judy throwing up her arms in frustration and anger, and eventually she throws what appears to be a drink at Michael before walking off. Michael then walks towards his car, and in a shocking turn, he comes back with a tank of gasoline. He begins to yell at Judy before pouring the gasoline all over her, starting at her head. Judy can be seen falling to the ground, likely because it got into her nose and her mouth and her eyes, and Michael storms off again. And at first, it seems like maybe he's going to get in his car and leave. Maybe this is as bad as it's going to get. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. Instead, Michael walks back towards Judy, and like a scene straight from a horror movie, he bends down with a lighter in his hand and ignites it, and Judy bursts into flames. And Michael just stands back and watches as she screams. After only a matter of seconds, a witness is seen running up to the couple, attempting to help Judy however they can. And it wasn't until this moment that Michael finally kind of like snaps out of it and attempts to do anything. He seems to run off. He comes back with a fire extinguisher and puts out the flames, but the damage had already been done. And it was clear at this point that everything he said was a lie. Authorities knew that they needed to get as much evidence as they possibly could, so they decided they needed to speak to Judy, which is very difficult, and I'm sure had a lot of conversations between doctors and them because they had to pull Judy out of sedation just long enough to ask questions. All she was able to do was nod. They asked her if she accidentally got gas on herself, which was the initial story that Michael had told them, and she shook her head no, which disproved it along with the video. They then asked if Michael had thrown gas on her, and she shook her head yes. This had been a deliberate and violent attack against Judy. Authorities then went to Michael, who was also in the hospital, and confronted him about what they knew. They're like, look, dude, you told us one thing. This video is showing us something completely different. And they let him know that they were charging him with felony assault and aggravated arson. He initially asked for a lawyer. He honestly seemed to act shocked that they were coming to him with these charges. But after a bit of pushing, he decided he was going to talk to police and tell tell them what really happened, and he changed his story. And Michael told police that the video made it all seem like something that it wasn't, and that it really was just an accident, but that he hadn't been fully truthful the first time that he spoke to them. This time, Michael admitted to police that he and Judy had in fact been arguing, and that at some point she ended up throwing a drink on him, and this pissed him off. So in retaliation, he decided to also throw something on her. He legitimately was like, if she's gonna ruin my clothes, I'm gonna ruin hers. And the first thing that he thought of was the gasoline that he had in the back of his car. He said that after he threw it on her, he planned to just leave, but Judy had begged him to stay, and he explained that she was going to change into different clothes, and suddenly she was sitting down in the grass to have a cigarette, like nothing had just happened. He went to light it, and she burst into flames.
I didn't think I got, there was that, realized it was going to be that.
Sure.
So I walked over to give her a light. That was it.
And then she just...
And when she went up, I couldn't believe it. I just didn't think that it was going to be like that.
And if you're sitting there right now telling yourself that that story is jumpy and makes absolutely no sense, that's because you're correct. It was all a load of crap. The police knew that there was absolutely no way what he was saying was true, because according to the surveillance footage, that would mean that they would have gone from extreme arguing and him dumping gasoline all over her to them being fine, having that whole conversation and casually smoking a cigarette in less than like 30 or 40 seconds. He was trying to cover his ass. Judy's family was in complete shock. They knew Michael was problematic, but never in a million years did they think that he would do something like this. Her mom had actually first found Michael in the hospital before she was able to find Judy, and could not understand why the police and nurses were trying to usher her out of his room until way later when she heard all of this information. Because who on earth wants to believe that one human being is capable of setting another person on fire and just watching them burn? Judy's mom even repeatedly went back to the police to see the video, to hear the evidence again and again, just to try to wrap her mind around someone being this evil. It was also at this point that they decided to look into his criminal history, because they're like, our gut feeling initially about this guy was not good. We tried to say something to Judy, they had so many problems, and they were like, what if he's done something like this before, harmed someone before? And what they found was shocking. Michael has a ridiculously long criminal history, and no one even knew about it. He had been charged multiple times with things like theft and stalking, aggravated menacing, inducing panic, child endangerment, domestic assault, and he'd even been a registered sex offender at one point. And if you think about all of the different things that he had done within the relationship, it all makes perfect sense. It was clear that he likely preyed on vulnerable women, threw them deeper into vulnerability, and got off on the control of it all. Judy went into her relationship with Michael thinking that this was the start of her new future, a new beginning, and instead had been taken advantage of entirely. As days passed, Judy kept on fighting. And if you're not familiar with what burn victims go through in the hospital, first and foremost, be so incredibly thankful, because the screams that you in a burn unit, it's something that will never leave your mind. Judy had to have her dressings changed regularly. They had to scrub off skin. There are numerous surgeries to do skin grafts, and hers seemed to fail over and over. She had one of her arms and all of her fingers amputated. It was an absolute nightmare. She had over 60 surgeries and coded 7 times. And all the while, her family was by her side, cheering her on, hoping for a miracle, while also hoping that proper justice would be served. But this was a very complicated situation. The charges that they were able to pen Michael with would only put him in prison for a maximum of 11 years. And that is just absolute freaking madness, you guys. He deserved so much more for what he had done. So prosecutors were really on the edge of their seat, in their own words, waiting for Judy to pass, because honestly, as difficult as that is to say, that was what was medically expected. Like, every single second that she lived was an absolute miracle and going against every odd out there. And when she did ultimately pass, they fully intended on charging Michael with murder and going for the death penalty. And when you've got all these different kind of charges that are currently happening and these potential charges that you know are coming but you don't know the timeline for, it's just a lot to kind of juggle. And by some miracle, after 7 months in a coma, Judy woke up, you guys. And she woke up ready to fight, which is like true Judy fashion right there. And it was just in time for Michael's trial. Now, Michael's defense had planned to push this idea that he had no intention at all of harming Judy and that it had all been some freak accident. And they had the upper hand initially of believing that they would never have to face Judy herself, that she would never make it to his trial. She would never be able to testify, so they could really run with whatever they wanted to run with. And this had been the same story that he was going with since the CCTV footage was brought forward. His defense claimed that if he wanted to hurt her, why would he have been taking her to rehab? Why would he have gotten a fire extinguisher? They said that all of these things were indicative that this was an accident and he really was trying to be there for Judy. But the prosecution shut all of this down so fast because what the defense didn't know but was that Judy was awake and she was willing to testify via video from the hospital room. Judy's testimony itself would single-handedly toss out Michael's entire defense, and the defense knew it. And not only that, but if Judy did testify and she died at a later point, that would do nothing but help her case in a future murder trial. Her testimony could be used against Michael. And so to silence Judy and in pure fear about what Judy would be able to say, what people would end up seeing of her and what happened to her in the hospital, Michael decided to plead no contest. And this was kind of like a very double-edged sword kind of feeling because Judy genuinely felt that she had been silenced by him yet again, that he was still maintaining so much control over what was going on. But at the same time, if he pleaded no contest, he likely would get the maximum sentence, which is what they hoped for. That at the end of this road, Judy would in fact pass away. They just didn't know the timeline. That could have been her only opportunity to testify, and she had it taken away from her.
Mom of two, Judy Malinowski, remembers August 2nd, 2015 so clearly. Monday, the man prosecutors say doused her with gasoline and lit her on fire, changed his plea to no contest and was sentenced to 11 years in jail. She never got to say in court what she's fought to stay alive to say.
You wanted to look at Michael Slager and tell him, I'm not afraid of you anymore.
Her mission now from her hospital bed is to warn other women about the warning signs of domestic violence.
She wants everybody to know, she keeps telling me, Mom, tell them verbal abuse is the start of physical abuse.
After 15 months, Malinowski remains in critical condition and still fights constant, debilitating pain.
The judge did end up sentencing Michael to 11 years in prison, the most that she could do within her legal power. And she said, quote, "You really do seem like one of those people that have no soul and you need to be incarcerated. That is all that I have to say." While the sentencing was at least something, Judy and her family strongly felt that legislation around this needed to be changed. So they all got together to come up with and pass something known as Judy's Law. This law would require harsher sentences for attackers like Michael that permanently disfigure their victims, because as Judy's family stated numerous times in the documentary, and as Judy stated herself, she got a life sentence because of what Michael did to her, but he was only facing 11 years. This went on to impact her children, her entire family. Their whole lives had changed forever, and he was going to serve 11 years and walk away like nothing happened. Everyone watched as Judy tried to change the world from her hospital bed, one day pushing her law and the next going into surgery. She spent 2 years fighting relentlessly for her life and for future victims, 2 years when it was thought that she wouldn't even make it a few hours. Eventually, it became abundantly clear that Judy was was getting tired. Her body was slowing down. As I said, she coded 7 times, you guys. So a decision was made. Prosecutors wanted true justice for Judy. They did not want to see Michael get away with what he did to her. So they put their careers on the line to try and do something that had never been done before. DA Ron O'Brien suggested that they try to get her deposition for her inevitable future murder trial while she was still alive. How crazy is that, you guys? Just think about it for a minute, and I can't even begin to imagine what was going through Judy's head, because that is a lot to process. It is a lot of reality to face. She was going to be able to fight for herself, you guys, after her own death. And after feeling so silenced by Michael, this was the most powerful thing that she could possibly do. But this had never been done before in the history of the United States, so they were unsure if it would be received the way that they had hoped, and there was a lot involved in this. They would not only have to convince a judge that this should be admissible in court for a potential future murder case for a woman that was still very much alive, but Judy was also going to go through a lot. She would have to give her testimony and be examined and cross-examined all from her hospital bed, and there was no telling how long that was going to take, how her body was going to handle it, and to make it even scarier, in order to be deemed competent and lucid enough to do this, she would have to wean off of her pain medications for weeks, meaning that she would probably be in the worst pain imaginable at the time of her deposition. This was scary. This was going to be a lot, and it could all be for nothing if they decided this wasn't going to be admissible. But Judy didn't hesitate for a moment. Everyone from her nurses to her family said that she lost so much in the hospital, but one thing that she did not lose was her fight. Obviously, Michael's defense fought hard against this. This was not something that they wanted to happen, and they claimed that it wasn't right to do this because Michael wouldn't get his right to confrontation, because when this deposition would be used would be after Judy had passed away, and he would not be able to argue against any of it, confront her about it, cross-examine her then and there. Honestly, it was so infuriating to hear that, because he had so much control in their relationship. He had control during the accident, control to start the fire, control to end it. He was able to speak up for himself while she laid in a coma for 7 months, unable to speak for herself. He was able to go to trial and make sure that she couldn't testify the first time, yet somehow he was the one that was going to lose his right to confrontation. This woman was about to lose her life, and he still wanted to shut her up. His attorneys attempted to remedy this by suggesting, get this, okay, you ready? Suggesting that he be in the hospital room while she gave her deposition. And honestly, I feel like his reasoning behind this speaks for itself. He told his attorney that if Judy had to look him in the eye as she gave her testimony, she wouldn't be able to lie. And not just that, but he wanted to be the one to cross-examine her. So in layman's terms, he wanted to be able to intimidate her and wanted to be able to control and scare her into saying whatever he wanted her to say. Thankfully, this ridiculous suggestion was dismissed, and for the first time in court, Judy was able to speak for herself. Judy sat for 3 hours answering question after question and speaking about what had happened to her after weeks of dropping her pain medication and experiencing probably some of the most excruciating pain anyone could experience in their entire life. She confirmed the events that were captured on CCTV. She said that her and Michael had in fact arrived at the gas station and had been arguing for 5 to 10 minutes before she did in fact throw her drink at him. She said that he retaliated by dousing her with gasoline. She spoke of the gasoline getting into her mouth and going down her throat and how badly it burned, and then of the pain that she couldn't even begin to describe when her whole body was set on fire by Michael. Quote, "I just remember crying and begging for help, and he lit me on fire. And the look in his eyes went black, literally. After I was set on fire and he backed away, his eyes just turned black as I screamed for his help, and he did nothing."
Did you have a cigarette?
No.
Did you ask for a light?
No.
Did you make up with Michael in any way?
No.
And when he approached you with the lighter, what did he look like?
Like Satan's child.
Did he appear to be angry or like compassionate, like he was making up with you?
He appeared to be full of rage and yet calm at the same time.
Was his approaching you with that lighter accidental? Did he trip or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No.
Judy, tell me how that moment felt when you were ignited.
It felt horrible. I don't think words can describe what it feels like to have your whole body's on fire. I can remember fire out of my face and eyes. I can remember screaming for help. I can remember looking over and seeing him just standing there staring at me with the look in his face that was just, like I keep saying over and over again, pure evil. Like, there's no other words to describe it. My whole body felt like the worst burn you could ever feel in your life.
She explained what life was like now, how she had lost so much because of what he did to her, how much pain she was constantly in, and how there were so many days where she just wanted to give up. It was too much. She couldn't be there for her children or for her family the way she had always wanted to. He took everything from her that day. And the defense took such a low blow approach. They had nothing, honestly. They had absolutely nothing. So the only thing they could do was pick Judy apart. They focused mainly on her drug use, as if that somehow was relevant to how she was set ablaze, and tried to say that her failing to remember the tiniest of details must mean that the trauma of the fire had clouded her memory, so nothing she said could be trusted, as if somehow all of this made her deserving of what had been done to her. She is a fighter, and she stood up for herself and shut the defense down. And honestly, it sucked, because even the defense himself in the documentary went on to say that he did not for a minute believe that Michael was innocent. He seemed to know that what he was saying was so wrong and just re-victimizing Judy all over again. And this is just another one of those moments where being a defense attorney really freaking sucks. But thankfully, Judy continued to speak up for herself and shut him down, pushing through the immense pain that she was in. She said, quote, "I called the police and I told them Michael was going to kill me and I needed help, but the detective did nothing about it. So here I am." She knew that she could rely on absolutely no one but herself. And so she fought through everything to be there to fight for herself when it mattered most. She was so courageous and steadfast in her testimony. The level of strength, mentally and physically, that it took for her to do that, I wish that I could wrap her up in a hug and tell her how many people have her back, and the example and difference that she set for others that have to face their attackers as well. One of the scariest things you could ever have to do. And she ended that deposition with her chin held high. Now, just months after giving it, it was almost like she had pushed to stay alive as long as she needed to fight. And now that she had done everything she could, her law was making its way through the House, the Senate, Judy moved to hospice. Her mother had told her that she would hold her hand until God took the other. And on June 2017, Judy passed away, surrounded by her loved ones. And immediately, Michael was charged with murder, and the prosecution announced that they were absolutely going for the death penalty. This had been 2 years in the making, 2 years of intense collaboration between many different agencies and people and witnesses to make sure that Michael did not get away with any of this. But before the trial started, and just months after her death, the rest of Judy's hard work came to fruition, and I just only wish that she could have been there to see it. September 7th, 2017, Judy's law was officially enacted in Ohio. So now those that have attacked and disfigured their victims will receive up to an additional 6 years to their sentence for what they have done. And while it wouldn't have ever affected the outcome of what happened to Judy, it would have never been applied to Michael. It would help future victims have the justice that they deserve and put dangerous people in prison for much longer, which was the one thing that Judy wished for. And then the battle started over her testimony being used in the trial, which I knew was going to happen. The defense couldn't get it thrown away initially, but I knew they were going to try as hard as they could to, because that was the one thing that was going to seal the deal of Michael's fate. The defense argued that Judy's testimony testimony be withheld, saying that it was not obtained in the proper way. They obtained it through civil law and not criminal, so it shouldn't be used in a criminal murder case. I mean, they pulled out every possible reason why it shouldn't be used that they could, but ultimately the judge totally dismissed them and said that her testimony would absolutely be admitted into trial. She deserved to be able to say what happened to her. And it was at this point that the defense, I think, realized they were screwed. And so they started to repeatedly ask for a deal. Michael's defense attorney knew that the moment this video was played and the jury saw Judy, heard about what happened to her, heard what she had been through and the 2 years that she fought for her life, they would decide that Michael was an absolute monster. And because the prosecution was going for the death penalty, they knew that if they just left this into the hands of the jury, that was exactly how Michael was going to be convicted and sentenced. So eventually they ended up striking a deal, because ultimately when Judy was giving her testimony, they asked her, what do you think needs to happen with Michael? And she said that he absolutely needs to get life in prison for his crimes. She did not support the death penalty. That's not something that she wished upon him. So ultimately her family, the attorneys, decided to strike this deal where Michael would plead guilty to have the death penalty taken off the table, but he would still get a life sentence with no chance of parole. So thankfully, Michael is locked up in prison and he will not be getting out. And I feel like this has been just such a theme on this channel, and not even on purpose lately, looking into repeat offenders and what they eventually go on to do. And it's honestly terrifying. And I feel like there's not as much focus on it as there should be. The fight for Judy continues to this day. Her family refuses to let her death be in vain. She fought too long and too hard, so they are continuing to spread Judy's message. Her daughters are now teenagers, and they advocate for not just their mom, but also other victims of domestic violence and other heinous crimes. One of her daughters said, quote, "My mom taught me that you can stand up to anybody." And this is a message that they want shared to every person that could be going through something similar to Judy. So they started Judy's Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, and it was specifically started to help victims of domestic violence and drug abuse and human trafficking. So they offer support and resources to not just the victims, but also their families, because they strongly believe it takes a village. It takes everyone supporting each other to help get people out of these situations. They also help to raise awareness by releasing documentaries and books. They share victims' testimonies and success stories to show hope and compassion. They hope to push further legislative change as well. And not just that, but they want to expand Judy's Law to a national level. They've also been working on something called Judy's House, which honestly would have been something that could have been incredibly beneficial to Judy. Judy's House would be a safe place for mothers and their children that are experiencing domestic violence, and that is something that is so needed. One thing you hear over and over in these stories of victims of domestic violence is, there's no safe place for me to go. I can't get away. I don't know where I can go where I will not be found. And places like Judy's House will be a lifesaver in every single sense. This is such a devastating and incredible story all in one, and I will never get tired of seeing things like this come from these tragedies where people that have just been totally knocked down over and over and over again experience so much violence, so much loss, so much devastation, push back and use all of the energy after it to fight for something good. It just really, I feel like, refreshes my hope for humanity. I wish that Judy could know how many people she has potentially saved, how many lives that she has changed, how many people she has inspired to stand up for themselves. Like I said, she is truly a hero. I really hope that they are able to push Judy's Law to a national level, because out of pure curiosity and honestly horror, I was like, how often does something like this happen? And so I just did a very quick Google search, and the amount of cases that popped up where someone was set on fire by their partner, you never would guess. And this isn't the only way that people attack others with intentions of maiming them or disfiguring them. I feel like the world could definitely benefit from something like Judy's Law being everywhere across the board. That is all that I have for you guys today. I want to say a huge thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to Judy's story, and definitely share it to as many people as you can. It is incredibly difficult to hear, but the level of courage that it could give to others that have experienced something similar change somebody's life. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. If you haven't already, go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Hallen fam so that we can hopefully bring them home together or bring them justice together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.